Hi, everyone. I'm Eric D'Souza, and I am continuing our series of interviewing the members of Crime Writers of Canada who have been nominated for an Awards of Excellence in 2023. Joining me today from Victoria, BC is Bill Edwards. Hi, Bill. How are you today?
Hi, Eric. Very good. Thank you. Thanks for having this opportunity to speak with you.
It's always a pleasure. A little bit about Bill before we start. Bill Edwards was born and raised in Rhode Island. He holds a degree in cognitive psychology and has been an award-winning teacher. He first developed a passion for writing in high school and since then has pursued many forms, including freelancing for newspapers and magazines, publishing poems, and authoring a textbook of psychology that has been published in 4 languages. He found his way now to Victoria, BC, and it looks like for a little while now, he's settling in crime fiction, which perhaps was a good decision because his debut crime novel, Killer Time, has been nominated for Best First Crime Novel, sponsored by Melody Campbell. So congratulations, Bill.
Thank you very much. I was very excited to receive the news about that. And I think every writer hopes that their work is good and that other people will feel that way. But it really is a wonderful thing and very exciting. Thanks.
I was on your website and I spent some time there. Your hook, or maybe your what if questions for your book Killer Time, is what happens if a serial killer is active and no one else realizes? How does the killing stop? Now, many of our peers, crime writers, have delved into serial killers and psychopaths, but you literally wrote a book on psychology. So how did your academic knowledge sort of give you an advantage, let's say, to writing about this antagonist?
Well, certainly I was not a clinician, so I never treated anyone who would be diagnosed as having anti-personality disorder or so on. I did once have a student who was diagnosed that way after he was arrested attempting to rob a bank, and the court referred him to a psychiatrist. He then came to me, I thought, to talk about our academic work. And he said, "Can you tell me what a psychopath is?" Because the court psychiatrist said that I am one. So that was probably as close as I came directly, although the germ for the novel arose because when I was in high school, there literally was a student in the high school who seemed your classic all-American boy, but before graduation was arrested and later convicted for 2 brutal rape murders. And this was a huge shock to me as a teenager, to the entire community. And it posed the question, how do you ever know someone? And how do you know if a serial killer is active? So that was sort of the jumping off point for the story and the character.
Do you tell much or any of the story at all from the point of view of the killer, or do you keep it from, I know you do several point of views, but do you ever jump into their head?
Yes, yeah, it is a multi-point of view told from third-person omniscient stance. So depending on the scene, one or another character will be central and their thoughts are revealed in that context. So the serial killer throughout, we do see him both when he's planning actions, when he commits the crimes, and when he looks at the reaction on the news reports, for example. The one element that is not made completely clear until nearly the very end is exactly what his motivation is. We know he's a very angry, resentful person, but also coldly dispassionate in planning his crimes. And there is a link to all of the crimes, but it is not obvious. So it's a challenge for both the characters and the reader to understand why did he pick these particular victims.
Oh, so there is a method to the madness.
Yes.
I don't want to say too much, obviously. But from my understanding of a psychopath is essentially they just don't have any empathy. So they could, do whatever they want to do without feeling regret from doing what they did.
Typically, that is the case, that they don't feel guilt. They evaluate what they should do on the basis of self-interest and anticipated consequences. And that's a very chilling notion, I think, for most people to consider. And there was, in the 1950s, a doctor who was convicted of several rape murders, and he was a very bright guy, as many psychopaths are, and he orchestrated his own legal defense and even filed appeals while he was on death row. And when he was ultimately executed the day before, the prison psychiatrist said, well, you know, Carl, I don't think you're going to get commuted for your sentence. So how do you feel about it? If you did get released, would you promise not to do it again? And he wrote back to the prison psychiatrist, well, I know people are upset at what I've done, but if you're asking me, would I commit to not doing these things again? I'd have to say, don't release me, because I wouldn't be willing to make that promise. And that's sort of a classic psychopathic mentality.
Wow. As you said, this was sort of the inspiration for your story was pulled from your own childhood. You also chose to write this, as you call it, a period piece in the 1980s. Is that the reason why you wanted to keep it in the 80s, or was there more to it?
Essentially, crime fiction and crime reality has been drastically affected by the development of DNA forensics, by computer profiling databases, by communication tools, including cell phones. And the world of solving crimes was very different before all of that. And one of the interesting things is, if you look at cases of serial killers in the 70s and 80s who were identified that, yes, there is a pattern here, only about 50% were ever solved. And that ignores the fact that there may well have been other serial killers that never recognized that the crimes fit a pattern. So it's different than today. Today, they would gather DNA from most crime scenes and very quickly figure out if there was a connection between different crimes. So I wanted to look at it in that era, because I think it makes the writing more interesting. And it was also more consistent with the inspiration for the book.
Were there a lot of challenges? I was on your website, and you blurb about or talk about how the police office would have been so different that 1987, I think, is when your book occurs. They probably didn't even have a computer. Like
they were just being introduced then, and most police departments were not computerized. Most newspapers were not computerized. The systems that did exist were so-called DOS-based mostly, so kind of primitive. I actually did use a word processor that was not a what you see is what you get word processor back in the day. So all of those elements come into the story. There is reference to a bit of Canadiana, in that one of the first crime profiling databases was developed by an RCMP officer in Vancouver. And I make reference to that system in the book because it was one of the very earliest, and it was originally developed in about 1985.
Is there a resource or somehow to sort of keep track of where the technology is? Like, I'm trying to remember 1987, like, was there pagers even yet?
Yes, pagers existed then, and they were really expensive and limited for most people. When my first son was born in 1989, I had a pager that I would know, and that was a big deal. So they existed at the time of the book, but again, they were very limited. Cell phones really did not exist at that point. So
no, I guess they had like CBs in their police
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
police cars.
Yeah.
Another choice that you made, again, maybe due to your childhood, is setting it in Rhode Island. Even though I think you've been in Canada for many, many years now. The only thing I know about Rhode Island is it's the smallest state in the US. That's pretty much it. So why did you choose that setting?
Well, there's the old adage that you should write what you know. And because I did grow up there, the locations that I use were familiar, and they reflect real places and areas. But also the plot hook of the book, without giving too much away, does involve threats against a costume jewelry company. And in the 1980s, Rhode Island was the costume jewelry capital of North America. Now, of course, everything's going offshore to China and so on. But in those days, Rhode Island had many, many companies that were producing costume jewelry, some of them quite large, some of them, very small operations. And after high school, I spent a summer working as a runner for a company that produced the small pieces that are used in making jewelry, like clasps and earlobes and things. And I would deliver them running around town to all these small jewelry companies. So because the jewelry industry does play an important role in the plot hook, it was natural to set the story in the area where at that time it was a very significant industry.
Wow. So this story must have been like steeping in you for many, many years, and you finally got it to paper. So congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
From what I understand, again, from your website, it looks like you're already writing book number 2. Is it a series or something completely different?
No, I know often writers have the most success developing a following with a series, but my new book, which has a working title of Frozen Fire, is actually contemporary, and it's what I would describe as an environmental thriller, because it involves a exploration company in the energy industry that wants to develop or exploit a new form of energy from the ocean floor. And they believe that this would be good and much less disruptive than things like fracking. But of course, not everyone sees the world that way. And there are environmentalists and others who are very opposed. And that sets up the tension within the story. And the central character is a geochemist who normally works for environmental groups, but because of the death of his mentor under mysterious circumstances, is drawn into working for this energy company. And so it's sort of a Michael Crichton type techno thriller, but with an environmental focus.
Ooh, sounds good too. I keep referring to your website. Would you like to say, and I'll put it in our notes, but what's your website? BillEdwardsBooks.com. And people can read an excerpt from the book, and there's background information, which I recognize you've read already, but other people may find interesting. Even if they never read the book, they may learn things about psychology and Rhode Island that they never knew. Yep. Bill, it was a pleasure chatting with you today. We'll have to wait till May 25th to find out the results, but I wish everyone good luck. So good luck, Bill.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to chat with you.
It was a complete pleasure. And thank you to everyone watching today. Have a good day.